Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are stripping back the layers on something everyone talks about, progress, but, rarely executes intentionally.
Right.
We are not looking for 5 quick life hacks or some flavor of the month mindset shift.
Yeah.
Our mission is to dive deep into sources that explore how to build a rigorous and intentional path to sustained growth. This is about architectural design, not instant landscaping.
I like that. It's less about the viral sprint and much, much more about designing a reliable, uh, a durable marathon.
Exactly.
That's absolutely right. Our core source material today is this remarkably condensed and fascinating dialogue. It's called The Architecture of Intentional Progress.
A highly distilled conversation.
It is. It's almost a philosophical manifesto, you know. It unpacks an entire way of viewing self-improvement, professional conduct, and most crucially, the mechanics of learning itself.
And for you, our learner, our mission here is to extract the essential nuggets from this dialogue. We want to understand how to prioritize depth, relentless consistency, and that meaningful, sometimes hard to hear feedback in any learning journey.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't about just feeling motivated. It's about building a foundation that doesn't crumble the second a real challenge hits.
So we're moving beyond just inspiration and into engineering, really.
Exactly. Okay, so let's unpack this. The philosophy starts right where we interact with the world, right? Our communication.
It does.
It starts with the deliberate choices we make every time we open our mouths.
The dialogue posits that the very first pillar of this intentional architecture is a conscious decision about communication style. The speaker in the source describes themselves simply as someone who thinks before speaking.
That sounds almost like a self-evident truth, but in practice, it's a radical act.
It is.
We live in a culture that rewards rapid-fire responsiveness, especially in professional settings. You need to be fast, you need to sound decisive.
Right, and the source notes that the intentional focus wasn't on speed, but specifically on being clear and deliberately resisting that urge to just rush in and sound smart.
What's so fascinating there is that the source immediately frames this not as like a personality quirk, but as a critical differentiator in how real sustained value is created.
Yes. The dialogue offers this compelling counterpoint. Most people try to impress first and understand later.
Wow. That rings incredibly true, doesn't it?
It does.
We often prioritize the performance of competence, the quick answer, the jargon over the actual delivery of clarity, or just the patience to truly understand what the problem is.
It's the performative confidence game. Speed signals authority,
Yeah.
and the speaker knows exactly why relying on that is so dangerous for long-term progress.
Yeah.
They state it plainly, and I think quite powerfully, that shallow confidence collapses fast.
Okay, let's pause on that for a second because that's a deep nugget right there.
All right.
Shallow confidence collapses fast. What does the source imply is the greatest risk for the person relying on it? Like, how does that collapse actually manifest?
Well, it manifests when the situation requires just one layer deeper than the script. If you rush to sound smart, you often build a foundation made of, memorized talking points or quick summaries. And that structure gets exposed the moment you're asked a follow-up question or if the initial premise changes.
The performance just faltered.
It falters because there's no depth to pivot from. You didn't build the internal schema, you built a facade.
So the intentional choice here is to fundamentally resist that immediate high-pressure urge to perform. It's saying, I understand the social reward for speed, but I'd rather build depth, even if it takes more time.
Exactly. Even if it means appearing slower in the short term.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture for you, the learner, this is a conscious decision to value consistency and foundational knowledge more than immediate speed or public reception.
You're seeking to be smart, not just sound smart.
Precisely. That deliberate, quiet focus on clarity is the first step because it ensures you're always building on bedrock.
Okay, that makes the philosophical basis clear. Depth and intentionality are the starting points. But how do we sustain that commitment over the long haul? That requires something more durable than just, good intentions.
Right.
And this brings us to the next pillar, the engine of sustainable progress, which is built on this really crucial and often painful distinction the source makes between motivation and consistency.
This is where the dialogue moves from philosophy into the harsh, demanding reality of daily practice.
Yeah.
The core belief stated here is that progress doesn't come from excitement. It comes from repetition.
That hits home. We're so often trained to wait for that spark, that feeling of enthusiasm to begin the work. We wait for motivation to give us permission.
And that waiting is precisely what prevents sustainable progress. The source makes it clear that relying on excitement is an unreliable, highly volatile way to build anything lasting.
Whether it's a skill, a business.
Anything, a body of knowledge. Dedication, according to this architecture, is defined by showing commitment, even when that initial emotional charge has completely vanished. The speaker says flat out, I show up even when motivation drops.
So showing up becomes the definition of the architecture. It's the single disciplined act that builds the framework, regardless of how you feel that day.
Exactly.
But practically speaking, how does someone maintain that repetition when the task becomes incredibly dull or when burnout starts to creep in? I mean, isn't repetition sometimes the enemy of creativity?
That's a great question. And the source implies that initial feeling of dullness or resistance is actually the moment of truth. See, repetition isn't merely doing the same thing over and over. It's the mechanism that shifts the task from a high-energy, conscious, System 2 thinking into a low-energy, unconscious competence. System 1.
Ah, so repetition is how you internalize the structure.
Exactly. Think of it structurally. When you first learn a new skill, every step is deliberate, it's exhausting, it requires a massive mental load. That's you relying on motivation. Repetition is how you move those processes into the foundational pillars of the architecture.
It builds the muscle memory.
It builds muscle memory and cognitive fluency. It solidifies the knowledge so that future, more complex work can be done on top of that stable base.
So if you're a learner diving into a new subject, the most important daily metric isn't having some breakthrough moment of inspiration.
Yeah.
It's committing to that simple 30 minutes of study every single day, even when it feels difficult or dull or overwhelming.
It's the ultimate sign that you value consistency more than speed.
Mhm.
Speed might bring you a flash-in-the-pan success, but consistent repetition creates structural integrity.
The engine doesn't run on inspiration, it runs on reliable fuel.
That's it. And I think this is a crucial point for anyone who struggles with procrastination. We wait for the grand feeling, and this source is telling us to just commit to the minimum viable repetition and let that create its own momentum.
The feeling follows the action, not the other way around.
That's right. So once you establish that depth is built through repetition, the next logical question is, how do you make sure you're iterating in the right direction?
Right, because showing up consistently, but consistently doing the wrong thing, that doesn't achieve intentional progress.
Exactly. You need external input. You need a guiding force that adjusts the architecture mid-construction.
Which brings us to the third pillar, the necessity of direct feedback.
And moving forward intentionally means, fundamentally acknowledging that you are inherently imperfect. You're prone to biases and blind spots.
Oh,
The source transitions beautifully here by examining the speaker's approach to receiving criticism, which, for many of us, is the most challenging part of any growth journey.
And the response is completely unambiguous. I prefer direct feedback. They're not asking for cruelty, but for pure, undiluted candor. And they followed this up with that really powerful, almost counterintuitive statement.
Yeah.
Polite silence doesn't help anyone grow.
Let's really unpack that idea of polite silence. Why is it the enemy of the intentional progressive? Most of us are taught that it's a social lubricant, it prevents awkwardness, it protects feelings.
It protects the ego, for sure. But if we go back to the idea of shallow confidence, polite silence just feeds it.
Yes.
If people are too polite to tell you where your confidence is shallow, you never get the information you need to shore up the structure.
Exactly right. Polite silence, in this context, is a massive opportunity cost. It safeguards the giver's comfort and the receiver's ego, but it stalls growth completely.
So true.
If you're truly dedicated to building depth, the most valuable thing another person can give you is the hard truth that illuminates a foundational error. Intentional progress requires maximum data density, and polite silence just reduces the signal.
So if the learner needs direct feedback, how do they go about soliciting it in a way that encourages that candor? Because if I just ask someone, hey, tell me what I'm doing wrong, they're probably still going to default to being polite.
That's an excellent practical point.
Yeah.
The intentional architect doesn't ask for generic feedback. They ask for specific, high-resolution data points.
Give me an example.
Well, instead of asking, how is my presentation? The intentional learner asks, which specific transition between slides 5 and 6 did you lose conviction in my argument?
Ooh, that's specific.
Right. Or if you had to change one line of the proposal to make it clearer, which line would it be? You signal that you're not looking for affirmation, you're looking for specific points of structural failure.
That makes perfect sense if your overarching goal is evolution. If you're truly dedicated to building that depth, you must welcome the information that tells you where your depth is lacking.
And this willingness to hear the hard truths is what fuels the final phase of their architecture. The speaker confirms, I am still evolving.
Right.
They define this ongoing state of evolution as a three-step cycle, which is essentially a feedback loop. I make mistakes, notice patterns, and adjust.
So the openness to direct feedback is what powers that crucial adjustment phase.
It's everything. I appreciate that the source doesn't frame this as a journey to a mistake-free performance, but as a journey of mistake-filled data collection.
I like that. It acknowledges that mistakes are inevitable, but inertia in the face of mistakes is not.
Inertia is the breakdown of intentionality. The process only works if you deliberately hunt for the patterns in your failure, and that pattern recognition often requires an external perspective.
Which is why direct feedback is so critical.
The mistakes are inevitable. The adjustment is optional, and is powered by consistency and clarity.
It's a fantastic framework because it removes the pressure of being perfect or, being finished. It just requires you to be engaged in the iterative process.
It loops back perfectly.
It does. You start with the depth, that intentional clarity. You sustain it with the fuel, which is repetition, and you steer it with the mechanism, direct feedback.
And that leads to the powerful concluding self-assessment offered in the source, summarizing the entire intentional stance. That's who I am right now, aware, intentional, and moving forward.
It implies the architecture is never truly finished.
Never. But the process of building is continuous and robust.
It's a compelling vision. So to synthesize this architecture of intentional progress for you, the learner, we've basically identified 3 non-negotiable pillars for achieving that sustained growth.
First, prioritizing clarity and depth in communication over rushing for speed or performing confidence.
Build on bedrock, not sand.
Exactly. Second, choosing repetition and consistency as the engine of progress over fleeting motivation and excitement.
Show up, regardless of how you feel.
Right. And finally, welcoming direct feedback. Recognizing that polite silence is actually the worst thing for your evolution.
Because true growth requires noticing those patterns in your mistakes and then having the fortitude to actually adjust.
And if you embrace these pillars, you inherently transform from a passive learner waiting for inspiration into an active architect building your own path.
So we want to leave you with a final provocative thought that builds on all this. If the speaker in our source is focused on being aware, intentional, and moving forward, that means they are constantly scrutinizing their own process.
And we learned that the ultimate structural flaw is developing that shallow confidence, which collapses under pressure.
Yeah.
And that the only remedy is consistent repetition.
So for you, the learner, we encourage you to ask yourself this week, where in your professional life or in that subject you've been meaning to master, are you prioritizing the appearance of success, that shallow confidence, over the steady, often boring work of repetition? What pattern should you notice and adjust this week to prioritize the consistent showing up over waiting for that next spark of motivation?
Because that commitment to the dull 30 minutes when you least want to do it.
That's where the real architectural work begins.
The intention is always the foundation, but consistency lays the brick.
That's all we have time for in this deep dive. Thank you for building with us.